Good morning. All right, we're going to do Stout-Hearted 7, Chapter 15. Chapter 15 is going to be in two parts. So this is Chapter 15, Part 1. Now began for Catherine what she would always remember as two of the happiest years of her life. The discipline of the Whitmans' house had become well established, and life moved in a smooth pattern of home, school, and church, all under the same roof. That sounds like us right now with COVID-19. We're doing home stuff, school stuff, and our church stuff all at home. Andrew Rogers, the teacher who replaced Mr. Hinman, was as different from him as night from day. Tall, fair, and good-looking, he had smiling blue eyes and a humorous mouth. In no time, he had won the children's confidence and admiration. Mother was especially pleased because he had a fine voice and played the violin well. He took over the singing class and organized the children into a choir for church and for entertaining guests. Many travelers came through Willapoo that fall. After supper, Mama would line up her stairway of children with tall Perrin at one end and tiny Henrietta at the other. To the accompaniment of Mr. Rogers' violin, they sang in full harmony, delighting themselves and enchanting listeners. Henrietta, though not yet 2 years old, could already carry a tune, and when visitors made a big fuss over her, Catherine was as proud as if she had been her mother. If father and mother worried about the Indians, they kept it to themselves. As far as the children were concerned, especially the girls, Indians were only part of the background of their lives, seen but not felt. Now and then, however, they sprang a surprise. The Indians were in the habit of bringing their corn and wheat to father's grist mill to be ground into meal and flour, and father treated them as he would have anyone else. First come, first serve. So the person who was there first gets to be served first. One busy morning, however, Tomas, one of the chiefs, demanded service at once without waiting his turn. When father would not let him have his way, he became very angry and stormed off, threatening revenge. At dinner time, father and the miller stopped the machinery and came to the house. In the middle of the meal, a terrible racket sounded from the mill, as if it were falling apart. The miller jumped up and ran out with father right behind him, and the children trailing after. As they reached the mill, Tomas stepped out and knocked the miller flat, then dashed toward father. But before he could reach him, another chief, Telekuktat, who was one of father's friends, appeared suddenly and grabbed Tomas around the waist. The man raged and fought, but Tilakakit was stronger. In Indian, he said to Tomas, "I'll let you go if you promise to leave and make no more trouble." Tomas sullenly agreed, mounted his horse, and rode away. Father and the miller found that he had filled the hopper with sticks, which had made the noise when he started the machinery. When the family returned, mother rushed, weeping, into father's arms. He patted her shoulder. "It was nothing, my dear, nothing at all. That Tomas, I'm afraid of him." "Telekuktat can handle him," father replied. More children were added to the family this fall when Cyrus Walker and Elizabeth Spalding came to spend the winter and go to school. Mary Johnson, from one of the immigrant families, was also eager for education, so she joined the Whitman clan, working for her room and board and schooling. She seemed like an older sister to the Sager girls, and they grew very fond of her. With a family like this, something was always happening that scared mother half to death, she said. There was, for instance, the Monday morning when some of the dirty clothes had not been brought downstairs, and she gave Helen Marr a candle to light her way to look for them. Helen returned with a few clothes, but no candle. "Did you blow it out?" mother asked. No, I stuck it in that keg of black sand at the head of the boy's bed, and I'm going back to look for the rest of the washing. Mr. Rogers took the stairs 3 at a jump while Mother stood frozen and pale until he brought back the candle. Only then did the children learn that the black sand they had uncovered and been playing with was gunpowder. Ooh, that would have been horrible. All in all, however, the winter passed pleasantly, with everyone well and not even much sickness among the Indians. The weather was so mild that as early as February, the trees began to put out their new leaves. Father had given Perrin, John, and Frank horses of their own, and often on Saturday afternoons in the spring, they brought them up for the girls to ride. Sometimes Mother rode with them. John carried her old side saddle from the barn, and she put on the gray pondage riding habit in which, she told the girls, she had ridden all the way across the plains in 1836, just 10 years ago. She began to teach the children botany, and one warm day she suggested a picnic so they could gather wild flowers to mount and classify. She packed a lunch and her good blue and white dishes in a small cart Frank had made. She rode horseback with Henrietta in front of her, while the rest walked. By now, Catherine's leg had improved so much that she could easily keep up with the others. They wandered up Mill Creek, so named for Father's mill, until they came to a pleasant place with trees and grass, where they spread their lunch. When Elizabeth's plate was empty, she turned it over and spelled out a name on the back. Spode. What does that mean, Mother? It's the name of the company in England that made these dishes. Our dishes came from England? Yes, they did. Of course, we bought them in Vancouver at the Hudson Bay Company store, but they bring everything from England. I should think you would have bought tin dishes on a picnic, Elizabeth said. I want you children to get accustomed to nice things and to handling them carefully. After the meal, they put the dishes in the cart and started home. On the way, Elizabeth and Helen noticed a wasp's nest, and when the girls made a game of throwing clods at it, the wasps swarmed out to attack their human enemies. Helen was stung on one knee, and Frank, who was pulling the cart, on his face and hands. Instinctively, he began to run, and as the cart bumped clumsily over the rough trail, 2 of the lovely spode plates were tossed out and broken. Worse than that, the wasp attacked Mother's horse, making it rear and plunge until she and Henrietta were almost thrown off. When they reached home, she called the children together. "Who threw the clods?" she demanded. Elizabeth hung her head, and Helen spoke up bravely. "Elizabeth and I did, but I threw first." "Up to your bed with no supper," Mother commanded, pointing sternly toward the stairs. "Oh, now, Mother," Father broke in. "They meant no harm. We can buy more plates." Mother's cheeks grew red. "You leave the disciplining to me, and then you leave the disciplining to me, and then you upset it." Suddenly she laughed. "Oh, well, I should have taken the tin plates." The children tried not to smile, but they knew Father found them amusing and adored him for it. When school ended and the Spaldings came to take Eliza home, Mother decided she and the girls would go a few miles with them and camp overnight. Frank drove the ox cart with David for a male companion. 6 or 7 miles up the river, they came to a beautiful spot beside the swift-flowing Walla Walla River, where the trees and blooming wildflowers made a real garden. After the Spaldings had gone on, the children waited in the river while Mother cooked supper. They ate around the campfire with much laughter and singing, then rolled up their blankets for the night. The next morning, the oxen were gone, and Frank and David set out to find them while the girls settled down for another day of fun. By noon, however, their food was gone and they were hungry. "Let's catch some fish," Elizabeth said. "I see plenty of them in the river." "But we haven't any hooks or lines," Catherine replied. Just then, a band of Indians, mostly boys they knew, came along the trail laughing and joking to themselves. They called out to the girls who waved at them, and the idea of fishing was forgotten by all but Elizabeth, who left the others and walked by herself along the river. She could see beautiful salmon swimming in the clear water and longed for a hook and line. Suddenly, she spied a big fish caught between two rocks at the edge of the pool and instantly pounced on it. Slippery and wiggling, it was almost more than she could lift, but she held on to it, wrapping her soaking dress around it. Elizabeth was just turning back toward the camp when, from nowhere, a hand came down over her shoulder and snatched away the fish. She looked up to see an Indian boy grinning as he held the salmon above her head. "That's my fish! You give it back!" she shouted. For answer, he raised it higher, but the leader of the band, a Delaware Indian named Tom Hill, who had recently appeared among the Cayuse, spoke sternly to the boy, who looked ashamed and gave back the fish. The Indians went on their way, and the girls and mother had a salmon feast before the boys returned with the oxen. And that is chapter 15, part 1.